Hello everyone and welcome to the highlight show of Clutch Chess. Hopefully you were able to check out the games, but if not, I will take you to the key moments of the final 2 days and explain to you how this tournament worked. So this was a tournament put on by the St. Louis Chess Club that involved the top 4 American chess players: Hikaru Nakamura, Wesley So, Fabiano Caruana, and Lenier Dominguez. So first it started with a match between Fabiano Caruana and Lenier Dominguez and Hikaru Nakamura and Wesley So. Eventually, Fabiano Caruana and Wesley So won their respective matches and were facing in the finals. So the way the Clutch Chess works, the first 4 games are scored normally, which means a win is a point, a draw is half a point, and a loss is 0. But there are also clutch games at the end of the day. So after 4 games, there are 2 games. After the 4 rounds, there are 2 games. On the first day, those 2 games are worth 2 points for a win and 1 point for a draw, and $2,000 each. And the final day, each win in a clutch game is worth 3 points and 1.5 for a draw. So even if someone is trailing behind by 2 or 3 points, they still have the chance to win the match. So let's get started with day 1 with our game between Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana. So this was a very exciting match, and there were a lot of interesting games and some key points that we're going to go through. I'm not going to show you the games from the beginning to the start, but just the highlights. So let's get started with this first game. Where Fabiano Caruana is black and Wesley So has the white pieces. So let's start in this position. So Fabiano has sacrificed a couple of pawns and started in a Ruy Lopez, so the position is quite wild. As you can see, the white king is quite weak, but white is up a lot of pawns. So c5, queen e7, knight e6. So Fabiano exchanges and brings his rook into the game. So even though white is up a couple of pawns, it's not so easy for him to do anything or easily win the game, especially with this exposed king on h2 and this annoying pin on the second rank. So he grabs another pawn, but now he has to face queen h4 and simply moving the bishop, so there are no tactics on the back rank. For example, if knight f4, then white would simply take, followed by checkmate. So to avoid all this, Fabiano plays bishop e7. Wesley decides to take this annoying knight. And bishop h4. And now actually, even with all these extra pawns, this was a critical moment where Wesley made the natural move of rook g2, because he wants the rook on the second rank, protecting his king and protecting the knight. But unfortunately, after taking on f4, rook a1, now it is him who has to find only moves to make a draw. So knight f3, because rook h1 was threatening mate. So check, has to block, threatening rook e3, and draw by repetition. So the day started with a draw, with Fabiano the black pieces, so in the next game he had the white pieces. So let's go ahead and start on move 14. So this was a Berlin, and we know Berlin has a pretty bad reputation for being very drawish, but actually it leads to very interesting positions. So once again, Fabiano decides to sacrifice a pawn, playing g4, and giving up his h3 pawn, with the idea of playing e6 and threatening to open up the position for his rooks and trying to get his rook to d7. So of course taking this pawn is impossible because the knight is hanging and king f7 doesn't work because of knight g5 and the rook hangs. So instead, Wesley took on g3, rook g4, and rook d7, which was Fabiano's plan. So here Wesley made a key mistake. He played rook c8, which is a very passive move, defending his pawn. Instead, what he should have done, as pointed out by Fabiano, is take, give up his 7 rank pawns, but play against the white king by bringing the rook to f8 and playing against this king and this pin. But instead rook c8 was played, Fabiano takes, and now Wesley blunders knight f8, allowing for rook h1 with a very strong threat of rook h8 and trying to checkmate. And it looks like knight e6 would actually work because the rook is hanging. So if check, black would check, but now knight e5 and the rook is under attack, the rook is defended, and there's no way to stop the checkmate. And in this position, Wesley simply resigned. So this gave Fabiano a full point lead. So in the next game, Fabiano had the black pieces, and this was a Benoni, which is an opening that Fabiano likes to use in his games, even though he thinks even a good Benoni is still a bad Benoni. So in this position, Queen b6 was played, and so in this position, actually White blundered with Rook a3, allowing for knight e4, and now we see that even though e4 was such a defended square, there's some miscoordination, because he played bishop g7, but after something like knight e4, bishop b2, and we see that the queen is overworked. So instead bishop g7 was played, and now takes on d2, queen d2, and we enter this position where black is simply up a pawn, but the adventures didn't stop here. And here Fabiano blundered in turn, and Wesley actually missed it, and he never saw this, that he could have won a piece simply by playing f4 in this position. And Fabiano realized this right after the game, but in the interview Wesley admitted that he never saw this option, which is maybe a good thing, because when you realize you miss such a thing, it can really tilt you. But we see that there is no way for the rook to move anywhere to save this knight, so he would have simply won a pawn. So instead h4 was played, and black is still up a pawn, but there's a limited amount of pieces and not a lot of time left, as you can see, less than 5 minutes for each. So Wesley managed to hold a draw here. So giving up a pawn, going into a rook endgame. So building a fortress, so Fabiano decides to give up his c-pawn, but there is no way to make progress here. There's no way to break through. And the game ended in a draw in a pawn endgame. So let's move on to our next game, which was a very interesting strategic battle. So let's start on move 16, where Wesley plays d4, takes, and instead of simply taking back, he sacrifices an exchange, takes on d4, and plays for a long-term compensation because the position is closed, so these rooks are kind of useless, and black's minor pieces will be quite strong against this weak king. So king h1, queen f4, g6, stopping any knight h5 jumps. So here Fabiano decides to give the exchange back, knight d2, but unfortunately he missed this key move of queen e3, which is really annoying. So he cannot take on e3, because now he will allow his opponent to have this annoying pass pawn and lose the f3 pawn. So instead he goes rook e1, loses a pawn, but still manages to draw the game, wins the pawn back. So a lot of chances for black because of this pawn structure, but b3, a key move, impossible to take the pawn because the knight is hanging. So knight e5 was played instead, and they exchange into a pretty equal knight endgame where everything was exchanged, and they very quickly, the game ended in a draw. So next, so the score now is +1 for Fabiano, but up next are the clutch games, which are worth 2 points for a win. So winning this is actually very important because it would allow Fabiano to either take a 3-point lead or would allow Wesley to leapfrog Fabiano. So let's go to our next game, where Wesley still has the white pieces. So if you take a look at this position, this is quite an uneventful game actually. So black does have this pass pawn on c4, but white has this very strong centralized bishop, so he goes bishop d6, bishop f6 is played, and white simply takes, so black cannot take with the queen, because check, losing the pawn, so he has to take with the pawn. So black still has this annoying pass pawn, which is quite dangerous, but because of the queens on the board and how weak this king is, white is always going to have some counterplay. So the game ended in a draw quite quickly. So e4, and just allowing for a repetition. So quite an eventful game. So we're entering the last round of the day of day one in this match, where Fabiano is still leading by a point, but there's still a clutch game ahead, which means Wesley could still leapfrog his opponent, which he did with a win. So let's go to start with move 19. So this was a very complicated game. Fabiano has the white pieces. Started as a Roy Lopez. So white goes d4, trying to open up the center. Queen takes. Rook e6, pinning the knight on c6. Pinning the queen, so the rook is no longer hanging. Bishop swings back. Rooks come back. So not taking on e5, because after this is starting to look quite unpleasant, because c5 is hanging, the pawn structure is weak, and white has really good play for the exchange. So instead plays c6. Now the rook is hanging. So here Fabiano had this amazing move of knight e4, because after something like this, let's say take, let's say take, white's structure is just amazing because there are so many weaknesses in the position. White has no weaknesses. Instead, he played rook h5, going for adventures, and he even admitted that he played very risky, and this risk did not pay off. So knight e6, and now the rook is getting trapped. So obviously wait knight h4 for a reason. So Fabiano decides to sacrifice, but Wesley defends quite easily because white just simply doesn't have enough. So he decides to take, and take on g3. So usually we don't exchange bishops for the knight, but the problem is after take, these pawns are just not going anywhere because it's going to be really hard to try to promote them in the endgame, and the king and the knight, especially even the king alone, will do a very good job of stopping them. So a5. So there are a few repetitions in the game, so of course black is not going to repeat. But you know, Russian school of chess, always repeat once. So rook e2, so he repeats one more time, and now a really nice shot in the position knight f2, threatening mate on h1, forcing to take, but after check, black simply wins a rook. So Fabiano played a few more checks, but black will simply stop the checks with the queen going to h6, and the game will be over quite quickly. So this was day one, and because of this win, Wesley was able to leapfrog Fabiano and also collect $2,000 extra just for winning this game. And the other $2,000 that were in game 5, they spilled over into games 11 and 12 on day 2. And speaking of day 2, let's move on and see what happened then. So now let's dive into day 2. So the day started with Wesley so with a full point ahead, Fabiano Caruana. So the first 4 games have the normal scoring, so to speak, which means each win is worth 1 point. So Fabiano starts with the white pieces, and let's move on to, let's start on move 30th. So we'll start in the middle of the game. So we have another Berlin. So very typical Berlin structure. So white plays e6. Fabiano found some really nice tactics here. He takes, and amazing move knight d3. So now taking on c3 is actually very unpleasant because this pawn structure is just atrocious. Instead, the knight moved back. Take on d3. And white won a pawn, and he went on to win the game, and I will show you how. So the pawns were exchanged. So h4, really nice move, h5, fixing the pawn on h6. So knight e7. And here, key mistakes, king d7, rook d3, and simply winning a piece because it doesn't matter where the king goes. White will take this, and it's going to be a fork, and the game is over because white is just up a piece. So now the score is even, and let's move on to our second game where Wesley has the white pieces. So it was another Ruy Lopez, and it was a very crazy game, very up and down game, which Wesley was quite upset about for a very good reason. So let's start on move 15, where Fabiano plays the c5 move, which Yasser did not like at all because, let's check out this bishop. So d5 was played. So this was a beautiful game by Wesley. So unfortunately there was a big blunder at the end. So strategically this is just a beauty to enjoy. So knight f5, getting the 2 bishops, maneuvering the knight back, a rook lift, always a great thing to do in chess. The rook can swing to either side of the board. So the knight on c4 just completely dominant, playing a5, which not only stops the knight from going to b6, but also just kills this bishop. Rook swings back to the other side. Now h6 pawn is hanging. Bishop moving to the other side. G4. And because the queen side and the center are pretty fixed, white is looking to expand on the king side. E4. So played immediately by Fabiano because he's looking for counterplay. So anything, because desperate times call for desperate actions. So H4, stopping the knight from jumping to G5, putting the bishop on the long diagonal, swinging the rook back, ready to go G5. Again, desperate actions, trying to create some kind of counterplay. So the knight jumps into the game. Rook calmly moves, grabs a pawn because what else is there to do? Queen D8, knight C4. So Fabiano decides to sacrifice and bring the bishop into the play. So here in this position, Wesley plays an amazing move F6 and F3. And now, funny enough, the knight is trapped in the middle of the board. So bishop E3, bishop back. So we reach this position where white is simply up a rook. And he plays this funny looking move Queen D3, which the alarms went off for the commentators because something feels odd about it. Because if you look at the position, we see this possible tactic. And after knight F2, rook E3, unfortunately white's position is falling apart. And this was a huge blunder by Wesley So, and a heartbreaking blunder in a completely winning position. So takes, and black is just taking everything. Taking all the pawns with checks, wins a piece. So now, instead of being down a rook, he's up 4 pawns. So the rest is just a matter of technique. I will just show you the rest of the game. So there are some checks in the position, but there are no real threats. Cannot take on G6 because of the check. So not even that. So simply takes everything. And at some point, Wesley just gave up. So this allowed. So with this win, Fabiano actually was leading by a full point because he was a full point ahead, but he won the first 2 games. So the next game was quite uneventful, but let's take a quick look. So another Berlin, but not a very exciting one. So G3, and this is very common to push this H pawn. So we're just going to see how all the pieces were exchanged, and not too much happened in the game, so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time because we want to get through to the exciting games. Simply takes, just a lot of exchanges. Bishop swings back, and a few more moves. Nothing too interesting, nothing to really talk about, and the game just ended in a draw. Okay, and still Fabiano was leading by a full point, and there was one more regular scoring game to go and 2 more clutch games to come up. So this game was just completely dominated by Wesley So, where he played a beautiful move. So in this game, Wesley So just completely dominated his opponent. So let's start in this position. So it looks kind of messy, but the first thing that stands out is this bishop again, which is reminiscent from the game we saw 2 games ago. So nice move, knight c5, taking advantage of the pin. So g3, takes, and just ignores it because g takes, the king hides behind the pawn, and there is no attack. Goes to the open file, h3, there's simply no attack, and black's position is just busted. Knight d5, a really nice move, exchanging the knights, going into opposite colored bishop position, where this is the bishop for black. They take c3 and simply check, and the game is over. Rook f7. King g8, we just have simple mate in 2. So really nice win by Wesley So. So now going into the clutch games, the score was even, and Wesley So actually only needed to win 1 game because he had the better tie breaks, and the reason he had better tie breaks is because he won a clutch game, which gave him the upper hand. So let's take a look at the next game where Wesley So has the black pieces. So in this game, Fabiano got really outplayed. So this was a Roy Lopez, and black just has a dream position. If we look at the structure, the dominant knight, the a file. So Fabiano tries for the last trick, going knight b6, hoping his opponent takes, but of course Wesley just ignores this knight. And we know that rooks on the 2nd or 7th rank are just killer because they just attack everything on that rank. So takes another pawn. And knight f2, a last nice shot. Simply because you don't take on f2. You check. King cannot escape. Has to block. But after take, b2. And if rook b3, knight d2. Picking up the rook and queening the pawn. So after rook a1 was played, Fabiano resigned. And actually Wesley won and he clinched the title, but neither one of the players knew because they did not read their contract, so they thought the next game is very important and could give Fabiano the opportunity to tie the match. So let's take a look at what happened in the final game. So here Fabiano with the black pieces played a beautiful game, takes on e3, queen g4, sacrificing an exchange. But if we look at the structure, this knight is just going to be a beautiful, majestic piece. f5. And again, just like in the other exchange sacrifice we saw, the rooks are quite useless because they don't have open files. The knight comes into play, and this king is just so weak. Check. Knight e4. Queen f4 attacking the rook. King g7, black doesn't have to rush. And just going for the exchange because that knight is just dominating. Black is up a couple of pawns already. And there's nothing white can do. So g4, and now the king is coming in. And the king on e5, beautiful piece, as is the knight on e4. So Wesley decides to sacrifice the exchange back, but unfortunately there is not much hope for him. So h5, giving up the pawn, but after check, all the pawns fall. So a beautiful clutch win by Fabiano Caruana, but unfortunately for him the match was already decided. But even so, he picked up quite a bit of money for winning this, and his bonus for winning clutch games in this tournament came up to $18,000 as opposed to Wesley So, whose bonus wins came to $10,000. So the winner, Wesley So, picked up additional $30,000 for winning the event, whereas Fabiano picked up another $20,000 for winning it. So great performance by both players, really amazing games, and really fun chess for all the fans to enjoy. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you're joining us on June 6th for the same format that will involve the top 4 Americans as well as world champion Magnus Carlsen, Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, Levon Aronian, and Alexander Grischuk.